The media world in South Africa has been abuzz since Dr Iqbal Surve, the chairman of the Sekunjalo group, acquired the independent newspaper group, with some competitors and staff demanding explanations from Dr Surve about who exactly forms part of his consortium. Dr Surve now joins me in our Johannesburg studios. Welcome to Political Exchange. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, Karima, and thanks for having me on the program.
Now, many people would argue that 2 billion, in excess of 2 billion, was a steep price to pay for a newspaper group in a declining newspaper market. What was so important about acquiring this group that you were prepared to do this in what many people would argue is quite a tough economic environment?
No, I think everyone is entitled to their own point of view. We're a business, we make business decisions. We looked at the fundamentals of the business, we looked at the growth prospects of the business, and there were many bidders, varying from, I think, around about the 2 billion to the 2.6 billion mark. And for us, I think it's a very good transaction in terms of the EBIT multiples, the cash flow, and it's a highly profitable business, by the way. I think this misconception that independent is not profitable or marginally profitable is really based on the understanding of its Irish parent as opposed to the actual South African business.
Mm-hmm. Now, many people were arguing that the group internationally was going through difficult times and that the South African titles were essentially being kept to service the debt in Europe, and that very little investment has in fact been put into the infrastructure, the operations of the titles here. First of all, is that true? And if it is indeed true, are you going to be recapitalizing the business? Are you going to be putting resources in?
Unquestionably, the South African business had a significant number of its profits repatriated to Ireland because of the debt situation of the Irish listed company. But that is exactly the opportunity for us. Mm-hmm. Those surplus profits that the business was making, which runs into hundreds of millions, by the way, this is not a small business. We can now invest back into the newsrooms, into quality journalists, into reinvigorating the titles, into expansion strategies. Yeah, so and you know, we see that opportunity.
Now, if you're doing your due diligence, you would know, of course, that the market share is a very competitive thing, and that your group in particular is not doing really, that well. Everyone's figures, circulation figures, are down, particularly in the dailies. You have the Daily Sun and the Voice, which are tabloids that are basically capturing, the market and doing very well, better than, for example, one of the titles in your group, The Star. How are you going to be able to expand given the fact that people are not reading newspapers?
Well, 2.2 million people a day read the independent group's newspapers. So I'm not quite sure where the statistic comes from. The second thing is that if you look at the group itself, some of its brands are in fact doing very well. So you take Isoleswe, mm-hmm. which is now growing and is probably one of the largest newspapers in South Africa today. So the question is, who is your market? Mm-hmm. And some titles, have decreased over the last few years, and they've plateaued out today. But if we had bought the business 2 years ago, maybe there would be an argument about should we be buying the business then. The fact is that the industry has plateaued. If you take Warren Buffett, mm-hmm. he has just bought a number of newspaper titles. If you look at the stats, by the way, because I'm a scientist, I'm a medical doctor, you look at the stats, the real science, you'll see that newspaper titles are in fact growing in developing economies. And it's very simply, the reason is that people are becoming more literate and they're reading more, and there's certainly that very important majority part mm-hmm. of the African population that needs to have newspapers. People are transported every day in taxis, in buses, spend a lot of time to and from work, and they can't listen to the radio, or they don't have their iPads, and certainly newspapers is a very important element of that. Mm-hmm. It's a question of repositioning some of them, but by and large, you're always going to have some exceptionally good titles, and you're going to have some underperformers. And yes. For me as a businessman and my group and the consortium, it's how to get the best out of both of those entities.
Now, of course, the group consists of about, 18 titles. There's been a lot of talk about the fact that there's overconcentration and that it would be best that you unbundle. Dr. Surve, tell us, are you in any way going to be selling off some of the titles? And more importantly, have you gotten any offers from competitors to, in that regard?
We have no intention to sell off any titles because there are synergies between the different groups. I don't think we are concerned about the suggestion that there's overconcentration, because the fact is we are acquiring existing business. We're not acquiring more titles over and above this business. Yes, and of course there's offers every day from South African competitor media groups who want to buy some of the independent titles. There are offers from international groups who want to buy some of the independent media titles. For us, we don't see the reason why we should be thinking of selling them off. Our view is that there's a lot of synergies and in fact expansion strategies won't allow us to sell off these titles.
Now, in terms of the actual business and recapping the business, the Sekunjalo group also plays in the technology field. And we know, of course, with the advent of online and social media, newspapers have taken a hit. Take us through some of your strategic interventions that you're planning to make around making technology work for the newspaper group. If one goes on the IOL site, it's pretty archaic in many ways, very difficult to access, information comes on it late. Are you planning to make technology a big part of how you're going to reposition the newspaper?
Very much so. Technology is a cornerstone of our strategy, not at the expense of the print media. It's very, very important. We see two very different markets. IL, despite its challenges, as you've pointed out, is still having 2.5 to 3 million unique users coming onto its site on a monthly basis, which makes it the second largest site in the country currently. What's important for us is that we've over the years invested in about 9 technology companies in the digital and mobile space. I was just recently at a conference of the World Bank on innovation and technology, where I took option on a number of other companies. So I think you'll find that our strategy to bring in digital and online and mobile in particular, using the content generated by the independent group, is going to be an exciting one if you're an African consumer of content.
Of course, there is this tech explosion on the continent, and we know in places like East Africa, there's been a massive explosion, in the IT sector. Are you going to be looking at potential expansion, continental-wide as well? I know that a lot of newspapers have tried. Times Media, for example, has brought out several Africa editions. Is that something that you're looking towards as well?
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that the continent is today in a very different space to where it was 5 years ago. I've always been an optimist about the future of the continent. The reality is there's huge amounts of FDI flowing into the continent. There's a highly literate base in the continent. People are coming back into the continent. And we're seeing entrepreneurs and all sorts of things happening. Japan just recently allocated 32 billion to the African continent for development. I've no doubt when President Obama gets here, he's going to allocate a very significant amount. So there's capital flows into the continent. I think that's going to result in increased infrastructure, increased schooling, increased universities, and a huge, huge thirst for content. And of course, it's a question of how you deliver that content. Africa's in a very great place to use technology to deliver that content, in particular mobile and digital technology. And I think we would like to partner with African entrepreneurs in doing that. And I have, through my associations of the World Economic Forum, many other initiatives, built up some really great relationships on the technology front on the continent and globally, of course. And so that will come to the benefit of independent, and it's going to make independent a really formidable competitor out there.
Now, of course, your acquisition has not been without its controversy. There's been a lot of attention on who the consortium is. People want transparency around ownership. You've responded and said that once the formalities are done, you will declare, you know, and make public your funding consortium and who's been brave enough to join you in this venture. Do you think that there is you know, an additional responsibility on a person like yourself to declare that, you know, who your backers are, or do you think that you're being picked on? I certainly can't remember that other newspaper groups have been asked to declare who their shareholders are.
You know, competitors are always going to do this because they've had a monopoly of the space, the media space, and I'm not surprised, quite frankly. I would be surprised if they didn't do this. I just think, however, you know, there's a level of debate which I think needs to be a bit more mature. I think it's childish to attack me personally or attack my company, just simply because we're a competitor coming into a space that requires transformation. Look, we have engaged with a transaction with a seller that's a listed company in Ireland. They have certain restrictions in terms of what they can and cannot disclose. We have always maintained that once the EGM is concluded, which is the 17th of June, we will come out and announce our consortium and the funding partners on the 20th of June. So I don't see, you know, why there's such a lot of fuss when we've actually said that. I think it's just competitors trying to stir up a bit of news and, you know, and who are extremely worried because for the first time, you know, they've got a fairly young, intelligent person coming into the space that understands technology, that understands Africa, that is well connected into the continent, that has got, you know, tremendous business in the continent, and they're going to be competing against that kind of media presence. You know, it's not always about competition. I think the industry must have common interests as well, in a non-collusive way, in a way which increases readership in our country and our continent, which is good for young people in particular.
Now, a lot of the speculation around your potential, or rather who your associates are in terms of money, has to do with the fact that people suspect that it's business people with very close ties to the ruling party and to the government. And of course, the subtext of a lot of the criticism has been that you are going to be taking over the group and changing the editorial focus of the titles and begin to, you know, preach the concept of sunshine journalism, that the narrative has to change. Dr. Surve, just take us through your understanding of how the independent group will be positioning itself editorially.
I think firstly, nobody must tell us who must be our partners. No one must tell us who must fund us. That is none of their business. We have never asked competitors who funds them and, you know, who are their partners, whether they, you know, wherever they get the money from. So I think it's a sheer audacity to tell us that. Of course there are public interest issues, and of course we have said we will address that on the 20th. And quite frankly, this is a commercial transaction and people have to wait in terms of the commercial timelines. But we will not be pushed around by anybody telling us what to do and who we must partner with. It's completely irrelevant to us as to the backgrounds of people. The fact is the majority of people in this country have come out of a struggle background and are in various organizations, including our competitors, by the way, including. There's never been a single bit of noise about that. So why make a noise about us? But I've done something very, what I consider unique. Because I understand some of these concerns and because I value independence of the media, I've gone and said, firstly, we will have an independent editorial advisory board. No other major newspaper grouping has done this. Secondly, I've said we'll have an editorial charter. And the importance of that is that, you know, newspapers are still, by the way, the most trusted. I know I'm on a television program, but newspapers are still the most trusted form of communication between the public and journalists, if you like. And so it's very important to ensure that that trust is maintained. And for that reason, you know, we have gone out of a way. We will look at international best practice in terms of the setup of the international editorial advisory board and the editorial charter. But I come back to the point that no one must tell us who we must partner and who we mustn't partner with.